Finally, with a man who can provide. That's what my ex-wife Sloane wrote for the world, but the bill in front of me told another story. Because while she posed with her new diamond, her so-called rich husband couldn't even keep the lights on at his company. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The photo spread fast, her hand outstretched, ring glittering like a promise carved in stone. Behind her, rows of wine barrels at a Woodinville vineyard glowed with golden light. It was staged to perfection. The kind of picture designed to draw envy. The comments flooded in: Queen, finally found your match. Upgrade. I didn't comment. I didn't even like the photo. Instead, I closed my phone, grabbed my keys, and drove north through November rain. Seattle rain doesn't fall, it hunts you. Sheets of water slammed the windshield as if the sky wanted to wash me clean of what I'd just seen. But nothing could scrub away those words: a man who can provide. Row fabrication sat in Ballard's industrial grid, gray against grayer skies. I pulled into the lot, half empty except for tired forklifts and trucks that hadn't seen service in months. When I stepped inside, the office smelled of old coffee and solvent, the kind of air that sticks to your shirt. No receptionist, no polish, just fluorescent lights buzzing like a dying insect. That's where I saw it, lying half-folded on the counter. A Puget Sound Energy final notice. Amount due $2,800. Disconnect date November 19th. I pressed the crease flat with my palm, almost laughing. Rich men don't miss their light bills. They don't gamble payroll against utilities. They don't leave the proof out where anyone can find it. The door swung open. Evan Rowe himself walked in, shaking rain from his jacket, watch face glinting under the buzzing light. He had that swagger, the Instagram confidence you can only rent. He clapped a younger employee on the shoulder, voice booming. "Don't worry, we'll circle back on those payments," he said, like money was a conversation topic instead of a deadline. His smile stretched wide, but his eyes didn't match. I stayed silent. Just a man in a lobby, hands in pockets, eyes on the details. He never recognized me, never guessed the history standing a few feet away. That was fine. I wasn't there to be recognized. I was there to see the cracks. Back home, the silence pressed harder than the rain. The oven timer dinged to an empty kitchen, mocking me with its normalcy. I sat at the table, pulled out a legal pad, and wrote a single name at the top. Rowo. Beneath it, a list began to take shape. Accounts receivable. Accounts payable. Liens. Payroll. Safety. I circled payables so hard the pen nearly tore through the page. My phone buzzed. A text from Eli, my son. "Mom Sep's happy." That one word, happy, cut deeper than Sloane's caption. I stared at it, the letters blurring, and thought about what happiness used to mean. A porch light left on until Eli got home from school. A Sunday roast filling the house with rosemary and garlic. Bills paid before gifts bought. None of that made it to Instagram. None of it glittered like her diamond, but it was real. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're listening from, because this story started with a photo and ended with a payroll. I leaned back, pen tapping the page, and forced myself to breathe. Maybe Evan was just late. Maybe he'd pay. But the final notice felt like a confession left in plain sight. And if there's one thing I've learned in 53 years, it's this: people who hide weakness behind flash always leave a trail. At 9 that night, the phone rang. Luis Ortega's name lit up the screen. Luis had supplied steel across the city for decades. He didn't waste words. "Peter," he said, voice low. "I've got invoices he's been dodging. You still want to see them?" I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "How bad?" "Bad enough," Luis answered. "Bring a pen. Coffee sips on you." I set the phone down and stared at the rain streaking my window. Each drop sounded like a countdown. I opened the legal pad again and slid the final notice inside, folding it between the pages like evidence in a case file. Because this wasn't just about bills or invoices, it was about the word provide. It was about dignity, about the son who thought his mother's happiness lived in a rented lifestyle. It was about Sloane laughing in public while I kept the silence of an empty house. The night grew darker, but inside something had lit. A small flame at first, flickering against the storm. Revenge doesn't start with shouting or threats. It starts quietly with a man staring at a crumpled bill and realizing he's just been handed the first weapon. I clicked off the kitchen light, slid the evidence into my drawer, and whispered to myself what I already knew. If Evan Rowe was truly the man Sloane believed he was, he wouldn't be dodging steel invoices. He wouldn't be leaving shut-off notices behind like breadcrumbs. The proof was already choosing sides. And by morning I would too. I cried over a car I never sat in. That's not a metaphor. That's the truth. A single receipt landed in my inbox, and it felt heavier than all the bills stacked in Evan Rowe's office. It came from Alonzo, my PI friend. Subject line: Ferrari weekend. Attached, a PDF. A May 3rd receipt for $1,860. 3 days at a rental track, complete with champagne photos tagged to an anonymous corporate card. I zoomed in until the numbers blurred. $1,860. Not a life-changing sum. Not compared to overdue invoices in the tens of thousands. But what it represented. That was priceless. Because that very same weekend, Sloane told Eli, "Your father never dreamed big." She said it while Evan posted slow-motion clips of himself revving a rented Ferrari, red paint gleaming under Pacific Northwest sun. And I sat at my table, staring at a receipt for a car I never drove, a weekend I never lived, a man I never pretended to be. I tried not to shake, but my hands betrayed me. The paper wasn't just paper, it was a mirror shoved in my face. That night, Hannah, my sister, stopped by. She carried Thai takeout and the kind of calm I've leaned on since we were kids. She placed the bag on the counter, looked at my face, and didn't flinch. "What is it?" she asked. I slid the printout across the table. Her eyes scanned it once, then twice. She didn't curse, she didn't rage, she just nodded. "We fight clean, Pete," she said. "We do it with paper." Her voice was steady, but mine cracked. "He's playing with champagne and horsepower, while his lights are about to get cut." And I stopped myself. The word "she" hanging in the air like smoke. Hannah pushed the food toward me. "Eat first, then write it down." That was her way. Logic before fire. So I opened a voice memo on my phone. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "If you ever feel small, remember this: the size of a receipt can dwarf a man who needs it to feel tall." The curry went cold, but the memo stayed warm in my chest. Sunday dinner that week was a wound disguised as tradition. Sloane and Evan hosted. Their house smelled like imported candles, but underneath I caught something sour. Financial rot doesn't stay hidden forever. At the table, Evan laughed too loud. His hand always on Sloane's wrist like he needed to prove ownership. Sloane's eyes danced between him and me. Then she raised her glass. "Evan sits, the man Peter never had the courage to be." The room laughed. Everyone but Eli. He kept his head down, pushing food around his plate. That silence was the deepest bruise of all. I forced a smile, lifted my glass, and let the moment pass. Not because it didn't hurt, God, it did, but because revenge tastes better cold, and I was already cooking something colder than ice. Back home, I opened my legal pad again. On one side, I listed what I could forgive: ambition, pride, the need to look strong. On the other, I wrote what I couldn't: falsifying logs, risking workers, mocking a man who built his life brick by brick while you rented Ferraris to impress a crowd. It was a short list, but it was enough. At 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. 3 PDFs attached. Amounts: $74,300, $18,900, $12,450. All overdue. All ignored. His message read, "Tomorrow, coffee." I stared at the numbers until the digits swam together. Then I whispered to myself, "Receipts don't just prove purchases, they prove character." And Evan Rowe Sip's receipts were proving mine right. The Ferrari weekend was just decoration. The steel invoices, that was blood in the water. I slid all 4 pages, Ferrari, utility final notice, and Luis's invoices, into a folder marked Rowe, evidence. Then I set the folder on the chair beside me like company for the night. Because loneliness feels different when you've got truth sitting next to you. The oven timer dinged again in my empty kitchen. But this time, I didn't feel mocked. I felt sharpened. Tomorrow would be whispers over coffee. Tomorrow, numbers would start to talk. Whispers don't bankrupt men, math does. That's what I told myself as I slid into a booth at a Ballard diner the next morning, rain streaking the windows like the city was eavesdropping. The place smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, the kind of joint where deals don't happen but truths leak out. Luis was already there, a stack of papers bulging from a battered manila folder. His eyes looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from months of chasing money that never came. He pushed the folder across the table without a word. I opened it. The first sheet nearly singed my hands, $74,300. Steel delivered, 120 days past due. The second, $18,900. The third, $12,450. Peter, Louise said, voice low, he seps late everywhere. Not just with me, he seps juggling bills like circus pins. Sooner or later, something seps going to hit the floor. I traced the numbers with my finger, as if by touching them I could absorb the truth into my bones. These weren't just invoices, they were fracture lines in a facade built out of Instagram filters and borrowed cash. I don't stat slander, I told him. I don't stat play dirty, but facts don't stat need makeup. Luis leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. Evan Nessen's been ducking phone calls, telling vendors he's since waiting on a big airport contract. If that deal doesn't set land, this whole thing collapses. I nodded slowly. Then we find out what that contract really says. By the afternoon, I was sitting across from Patrice Nolan, my lawyer friend. Her office smelled of leather and order. She flipped open a clean legal pad, pen poised. You want to play this right, Pete? We use what Sense Public, UCC liens, procurement packets, lawful recordings. That way, when this comes to court or boardroom, no one can touch us. I nodded. I sup not here to burn him. I sup here to reveal him. My phone buzzed as if on cue. Alonzo Reed, my PI, calling from the steps of the county building. His voice carried the echo of marble halls. 2 UCCs on row fabrication, he said. Asset-based lender from 2022, equipment lease spring of SIF to 24. He sips leveraged like a ladder missing rungs. I jotted notes in a numbered notebook I'd started calling boardroom, because that's where this story was headed. Not a bar fight, not a Facebook spat, a boardroom. That evening, Hannah spread spreadsheets across my kitchen table, lines and columns that looked more like wounds than numbers. She tapped a cell highlighted in red. If top customers delay 15 days, payroll misses. Vendors one test extend forever. He seps hanging by dental floss. Pete. The timer dinged in the background, but neither of us moved. I watched Hannah Sip's pen hover over the numbers, steady as always. He sips not rich, she said. He sips reckless. I picked up my phone and called Anika, a friend in private credit. She answered on the second ring, voice brisk. Talk to me. I laid it out, unpaid vendors, leveraged equipment, conditional contracts. There was a pause, then she said, distressed buy as possible. Banks like oxygen. If you can show he seps out of air, they sell back you. Her words lit something in me. For the first time since that Instagram post, I felt the ground shift under my feet, not from betrayal, but from leverage. At 9:03 p.m., an email landed in my inbox. Subject, procurement packet, airport project. The body was short, almost clinical. Contract conditional pending safety compliance. Packet ready for pickup November 12th. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the screen. Safety compliance. If there was a crack in Evan's crown jewel, this was where it would show. Before closing my laptop, I scribbled one line at the bottom of my notebook page. Whispers over coffee turned into roars in boardrooms. I shut the notebook and whispered to myself, just to hear it aloud. Whispers don the scent bankrupt men, math does. And Evan Rosip's math was already screaming. His crown jewel had a crack through the middle. That thought hit me the moment I opened the procurement packet for the airport project. The papers smelled faintly of toner and dust, like every government document does, but what they said was sharp and clean. Contract conditional pending safety compliance. On paper, the airport deal was Evan's salvation. Millions in future revenue. His proof to lenders, vendors, even Sloane, that he was building something real. But those 4 words, pending safety compliance, turned the crown into glass. One drop, one slip, and it would shatter. Back at Rowe Fabrication's floor, I didn't have to look far for the crack. An employee, nervous, glancing over his shoulder, slipped me a photo on his phone. A forklift mast split clean through like a bone fracture. The steel beams it was lifting could have come down on anyone's head. I flipped through the company safety log later that night. Evan's signature sat bold and smug at the bottom of the page. Inspected same day. The same day that mast nearly snapped in half. I didn't rage. I didn't storm his office. I just circled the date in red, then laid the photo beside it. 2 truths side by side. That's all it takes. A call from Janice, a project manager at Merit Installations, added another fracture line. We have had 2 near misses waiting on Rose SIP's deliveries, she admitted, her voice tense. The airport SIP's already twitchy about compliance. One more slip and they said'll pull the plug. Safety isn't paperwork, it's lives. And Evan had turned it into a checkbox. That night, Hannah spread out the aging schedule on my kitchen table again. She'd formatted it so cleanly it looked like a courtroom exhibit. Rows of red highlighted numbers, vendors circling like sharks. She looked at me over her glasses. This isn't set just financial, Pete. It sets criminal negligence waiting to happen. I thought about Eli, about what Sloane told him, that I never dreamed big. Maybe not, but I'd always dreamed safe. Roofs that held, floors that didn't collapse, paychecks that cleared. That was my dream, and it still was. Patrice, my lawyer, stepped into the picture with her usual calm precision. She drafted a non-binding letter of intent, $10 million package, equity plus line of credit. Contingent, of course, on lender consent and vendor cures. On paper, it was an offer. In reality, it was a blade slid under the door. I practiced the pitch out loud, my voice steady even as my hands trembled slightly. "I zip not here to win," I said to the empty room. "I zip here to keep people paid." At 7:14 p.m. An email pinged my inbox. Subject line, service interruption. Scheduled. It was Puget Sound Energy again, confirming what the final notice had already promised. Disconnect scheduled for November 19th at 4 p.m. I underlined it twice in my notebook, the ink pressing so deep it bled through the page. I sat back in my chair, lights dim, rain streaking the glass outside, and realized something cold and sharp. Evan wasn't just broke, he was reckless. And reckless men in hard hats get people killed. The Ferrari receipt had made me angry. The utility bill had made me suspicious. But this cracked mast, this falsified safety log, this made me certain. Certain that the airport deal wasn't his salvation. Certain that vendors would rally to my side once truth came out. Certain that when the time came to pull back the curtain, I'd have more than enough paper to end the show. I clicked off the kitchen light and whispered to myself, his crown jewel had a crack through the middle, and soon the whole crown SIP's coming down. I brought a pen, not a sword. That's how I reminded myself as I walked into the waterfront restaurant that Friday. The bay glittered beyond the windows, sunlight bouncing off the ripples like it was mocking me. Seattle can look mercilessly beautiful when your heart is boiling. Evan was already seated. He wore a blazer too tight across the shoulders, as if he'd borrowed someone else's success. His watch caught the light with every hand gesture, deliberate, rehearsed. Beside him, Sloane arrived late, pearls at her throat, laughter a little too sharp. The waiter hovered with menus, but Evan didn't bother to look. "We'll start with oysters. And the Merlot," he said, waving his hand like he owned the vineyard itself. I ordered water. My appetite was for truth, not wine. I kept my voice calm, almost casual. "You Stev built a good brand, Evan, but it needs oxygen." He leaned back, smile too wide. "We Sep got plenty of air. That's when I slid the folder from my bag and set it on the table. First, the $74,300 invoice. His smile faltered. Then the $2,800 final notice. His jaw tightened. Next, the Ferrari receipt for $1,860. His fingers tapped the table faster now. And then last, the photo of the cracked forklift mast. I placed the falsified safety log right beside it. His signature a black scar on white paper. Fine, I said, voice steady, is expensive when the lights go out. For the first time, Evan didn't look at me. He looked at Sloane. She smirked, leaned close, and whispered loud enough for me to hear. He Sep's bluffing. I tapped the pen on the table. Not a threat, just punctuation. You have until November 20th, I said. On the 21st, I asked them with your lender. You said I'll want to call them before I do. The oysters arrived, glistening on crushed ice. But no one touched them. Sloanette's eyes glittered like her pearls. You came here to humiliate us? I met her gaze. Steady. No. I came here to offer survival. You just don't set like the terms. Evan shifted in his seat, throat working. I need time. You have 4 days, I replied. Time runs out faster than credit. I folded the papers, slid them back into the folder, and placed a crisp 20 on the table to cover my water. They hadn't noticed, but I'd paid my own bill, always. As I stood, the wind off the bay pushed through the door, cold and briny. December whispered at the edge of November. I walked out without looking back because men who sign false safety logs don't deserve the courtesy. At 11:03 p.m. that night, my phone buzzed. Tomorrow. Alone. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark of my apartment. Outside, the city pulsed with late-night noise. Inside, silence thickened around me. Alone. That's how cowards always ask to meet when their lies begin to choke them. I slid the phone onto the table beside my legal pad. I wrote 2 words in bold ink. Transition coming. Because whether Evan realized it or not, the countdown had already begun. Charisma dims faster than bulbs. That was the thought in my head as I walked the floor of Row Fabrication with Evan on November 19th. He moved like a tour guide, selling a dream that was already in foreclosure. The shop floor clanged with steel on steel, but beneath the noise I caught whispers, workers exchanging glances, voices pitched low, like children watching their father bluff at cards. Evan waved his arms as if the space itself was proof of success. Big airport installed December 1st, he boasted, voice echoing across the rafters. Race against time, but we'll deliver. I nodded. Let him talk. Words were his currency, but paper was mine. I asked to speak with HR. A young woman, eyes ringed with fatigue, pulled me aside near the vending machines. She spoke in quick bursts, expense reimbursements. 2 months late, mileage checks bounced. People are nervous, mister. She caught herself, glancing back toward Evan. People are nervous. Later, in the welding bay, a foreman tugged at my sleeve. His voice was gravelly, worn down by decades of overtime. Overtime sets, been shorted 2 cycles, he muttered. Guys are tired of empty promises. If he doesn't fix it, they settle walk. I thanked him, wrote it down in my numbered notebook under affidavits needed. Every confession was another nail in a coffin. Evan didn't even realize he was lying in. At 3:20 p.m., the moment came. A hum, then a stutter, then silence. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then died. The floor groaned with voices rising. Machines halted. Someone cursed. The final notice had not been theater, it had been prophecy. Evan barked orders, voice cracking as he shouted at a manager, "Get it back up, now." His bravado melted in real time, panic bleeding through the edges. I stepped outside, phone already in hand, rain cool against my face. I dialed Anika. She answered sharp, like she'd been waiting. 9 a.m. tomorrow, she said, before I even spoke. Risk call with the bank. Topic covenants and continuity. Bring proof. Proof is all I have, I told her. That evening, my apartment smelled of takeout I couldn't eat. Eli showed up unannounced, textbooks under his arm, hair damp from the rain. He dropped his bag, sat at the table, and looked at me with eyes too old for 19. Dad, he said slowly, Mom says Evan Sepp's building an empire. What are you building? The question split me. For a moment I saw myself through his eyes. A man with a drawer full of receipts, a notebook full of numbers, a kitchen timer that dinged into silence. I closed the ledger in front of me, placed my hand flat on it. Something that lasts, I said. My voice was steady even if my heart wasn't set it. Something built on more than champagne weekends. Ely studied me for a long moment, then nodded. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. That was enough. We ate quietly. The oven timer dinged, same as always. But this time it didn't mock me. This time it felt like a clock counting down to a truth about to be revealed. When Eli left, I sat back down at the table, pen in hand, and underlined tomorrow's date in my notebook. November 20th, lender risk call 9 a.m. Charisma dims faster than bulbs. And tomorrow, when the bankers heard the silence of unpaid bills and falsified logs, Evan's glow would finally flicker out. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the blinds. That was my plan. As I buttoned my jacket on the morning of November 21st, the day before at 9 a.m., I had laid out the math on a lender risk call vendor aging that could choke cash flow, a $2,800 utility shutoff that had actually hit at 3:20 p.m. in a safety log signed against the truth of a split forklift mast. I didn't dramatize. I documented. When I hung up, the banker's last sentence was the only one that mattered. We'll convene a meeting tomorrow. Expect our preference to be continuity with controls. Continuity with controls. A soft phrase that means someone else should drive. The conference room was all glass and damp light. A November sky smudged over Seattle like a pencil thumbprint. Around the table, Evan, a silent partner named Trey, who looked like a country club in a suit, Anika dialing in from her office, camera on, the lender's risk officer and counsel, Patrice beside me with a neat stack of folders, and Janice from Merit Installations waiting outside with a manila envelope and a steady heartbeat. Evan opened with a grin full of enamel and bravado. Let me frame the narrative, he said. Growth pains, new verticals, the airport project is the crown jewel. December 1st install, then cash comes in like tide. I let him talk. When men sell wind, the room eventually gets cold. The risk officer adjusted his glasses. Peter, you requested this review. Start with your concerns. I slid the first folder forward. Vendor aging, I said. Luis Ortega Steel, $74,300 at 120 days. Additional suppliers at $18,900 and $12,450. Promises made, wire confirmations not received. These are oxygen masks. I watched Trey's jaw click. He wrote nothing down. Men who don't write often don't pay. I placed the second folder on the table, turned it so the header faced the bank. Utilities, Puget Sound Energy final notice for $2,800. Disconnect scheduled for November 19th, 4 p.m. Power flickered at 3:20. Production halted. That SIP's not growth pains. That SIP's loss of pulse. Evan leaned forward, palms up. A timing issue. We were smoothing receipts. You know how AR works in construction. AR doesn't set fix falsified signatures, I said, tapping the third folder. Safety, forklift mast cracked. Photo taken by an employee on the day the log claims inspection, the same day. The signature on that log is yours. The room didn't move for a second. Outside the glass, rain stitched the skyline. Patrice's voice was level. We presenting facts available in public records or produced by employees ready to sign affidavits. If needed, those affidavits are prepared. The banker cleared his throat. Airport contract. I nodded to the fourth folder. Procurement packet says conditional pending safety compliance. Deliveries missed to Merit Installations created 2 near-miss events on a live site. That condition isn't set a watermark. It sets a tripwire. Speculation, Evan snapped. No one lost a finger. We delivered where it counted. Then we'll let the site speak. I looked toward the door and gave a small nod. Janice stepped in, coat still damp, envelope tucked under her arm. She didn't look at Evan. She looked at the banker. We had 2 near misses waiting for Rose material, she said. We logged them with procurement. Our tolerance is gone. If safety compliance isn't verified this week, we request reassignment. I have the emails. She didn't slam the envelope down. She placed it gently, like a nurse setting down truth. Trey spoke for the first time. This all reads like a competitor sit. It reads like invoices, I said. It reads like a non-functioning light switch in a forged sense of safety. It reads like payroll that could miss if December slips by 10 days. I slid the final document onto the glass. Anika's term sheet. This is a $10 million recap and acquisition proposal. Equity plus committed working capital line. Vendor cures day 1, $74,300, $18,900, $12,450. Safety remediation immediate, the cracked mast tagged out and replaced. Third-party training. All existing employees retained, with preference for those who told the truth. The risk officer read with a finger moving line by line. I met his eyes. Lender consent, management transition for 30 days, then change of control effective December 9th. Evan Semp's title becomes advisor during transition. No operational authority. On December 1st, I serve as interim CEO. Piss'll sleep on the shop floor if I have to, but checks clear. Anika spoke calmly through the speaker. Our diligence indicates a solvency issue trending negative under current leadership. We prefer continuity with a management handoff to a party who can stabilize vendors and hit the airport delivery date. Our capital is contingent on that handoff. Evan laughed, but it was a sound with no air under it. You think you can just walk in here and buy my company with your little spreadsheet? I think your company is renting time, I said, and the lease is up. Patrice slid a slim folder toward Evan. Non-binding LOI you received at lunch. Now updated with the bank's SEPS review. You can call this an ambush, or you can call it survival. We prefer the latter. The banker closed his copy, exhaled, and turned to Evan. We are prepared to declare a compliance review today which would freeze discretionary draws and tighten covenants. Alternatively, we can consent to a change of control with immediate vendor cures and payroll assurance, subject to this proposal. Trey Sip's pen finally moved. What happens to equity? Stays in the room, I said, but diluted under new capital and covenants. That SEP's the price of oxygen. For a flicker of a moment, I almost felt sorry. Then I remembered the cracked mast and the kid in HR counting bounced reimbursements. Evan stared past me, out at the bruised sky. This is a setup, he whispered. No, I said softly. This is a seatbelt. Silence gathered like fog. Somewhere down the hall, a printer whirred. The banker looked at Evan, then at me. We prefer change of control. There it was. 4 words that sound clinical until you realize they rearrange a man's life. The papers came out. The transition agreement, the interim CEO letter effective December 1st, the 30-day advisory role for Evan, consent from the bank conditional on vendor cures and safety remediation. Patrice set them in order like a dealer laying out a sober hand. I signed first. My name on paper felt less like triumph and more like duty. Evan signed with a grip so tight the pen scratched the page. Trey pressed his lips thin and added his name where required. I stood, walked to the window, and found the cord. The blinds hissed up. Rainlight poured in, flooding the glass table, bleaching every shadow until only paper remained. I turned back to the room. I didn't raise my voice, I said. I raised the blinds. No one answered. That was fine. Truth doesn't need applause. The banker gathered the signatures, satisfied. Next steps? I opened my numbered notebook, boardroom, page 19. This afternoon, circulate the transition memo. Tonight, schedule Thanksgiving payroll. Cue vendor wires for Friday. $74,300 to Luis, $18,900, and $12,450 to the others. Tomorrow, tag out the cracked mast. Third-party safety training slotted for Monday. Monday, 8 a.m. All hands floor, not conference room. We start where the noise is. Patrice slid me a small sleeve. Inside, 2 access fobs and a note. It prepared to downgrade current admin privileges per agreement. Effective window, November 21st. December 9th. Continuity without cruelty, just boundaries with receipts. Evan looked smaller in the sudden daylight. I need my truck to meet a client, he murmured. You can take the truck, I said, and the truth. Both travel well. He didn't answer. Trey checked his phone like it contained a different reality than the one on the table. Janice gave a small nod, almost a bow, and left the envelope with the near-miss emails. We said I'll be on site for the handoff, she said. December 1st delivery holds if safety is real. It will be, I promised. Promises are dangerous things if you can't afford them. I could. When the room emptied, I stayed by the window, watching the rain wash the city clean where it could. My phone buzzed a message from Hannah, standing by for payroll run templates. Proud of you. I typed back vendor wire schedule tonight. Tell Luis he'll sleep well. Another buzz. Elay. How'd it go? I stared at his name, at the little blinking cursor, and wrote the only sentence that mattered. Checks will clear. I slipped the signed agreements into an envelope, then into my bag, then into a locked drawer waiting at my office. Evidence isn't just gathered, it's housed. Custody matters. My recorder, legal in Washington, had been on the table the whole time. Red light tucked behind a charging brick. I didn't need drama. I needed a record. As I stepped into the hallway, the risk officer caught up. You were precise, he said, not vindictive. Revenge is a boundary with a receipt, I answered. We're just filing it. He smiled with something like relief. See you at the site. Outside, the air smelled metallic and clean, like the moment after a storm when the sky forgets how to hate you. I pulled my collar up, walked into the rain, and felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I'd won, but because people would be paid and nobody would lose a hand under a lying signature. By nightfall, the transition memo was in inboxes. Subject: leadership update and holiday payroll assurance. I read it twice before sending, then once more after, the way you touch your pocket to make sure the keys are still there. It confirmed the fob reprogramming schedule. Thanksgiving payroll queued, vendor wires staged for morning release. I set 3 alarms I wouldn't need, placed my notebook beside the bed, and clicked my lamp off. Tomorrow wouldn't be a celebration. It would be work, and work is how the truth keeps its promises. My feast was pay stubs that cleared. That's what I told myself on November 24th as I walked the shop floor instead of a ballroom. Thanksgiving week has its own rhythm in Seattle. The air sharpens, families count pies and turkeys. In the glossy parts of town, people reserve banquet halls and clink glasses. But on my side of the city, truth tasted like direct deposits hitting accounts without delay. At 7 a.m. sharp, Hannah texted. Payroll posted, all clear. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Hours later, the break room filled with the sound of relief, workers checking their phones, murmuring to each other, shoulders dropping. A guy in welding boots actually laughed, short, stunned. It cleared, he said. First time in weeks. But tote. That laugh was worth more than oysters on ice. At noon, I logged into the bank portal myself. One by one, the wires went out. $74,300 to Luis Ortega. $18,900 and $12,450 to the other vendors. Luis didn't call. He didn't need to. At 12:17, a text landed on my phone with just one word: respect. That's the kind of word you can't buy. You can only earn it invoice by invoice. I walked the floor with the safety lead that afternoon. Together we tagged the cracked mast, spray painting it red and taping it off. The sound of duct tape tearing was more satisfying than any toast I could have given at a gala. The mast would never lift another load. By Monday, a third-party nonprofit trainer would be on site, teaching safety not as paperwork but as muscle memory. My phone buzzed again, this time with a different kind of message. Did you plan this to humiliate him? I stared at the words, thumb hovering. For years she had measured my worth in what I didn't do. Not glamorous enough, not loud enough, not showy enough. She thought everything I built was just scaffolding for someone else's stage. I turned the phone face down and signed 3 affidavits instead. Overtime back pay owed to workers who had gone home too many nights empty-handed. Justice isn't humiliation. Justice is checks that don't bounce. That evening, I sent an email to the entire crew. Subject line: Holiday Party, December 13th. Party, families welcome. Food, music, and a roof that will hold. Because the best gift is stability. Small words, but the replies that rolled in were anything but small. Thumbs up emojis, thank you notes. A meme of a turkey wearing a hard hat. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was relief, and relief is the soil where loyalty grows. Meanwhile, Evan lurked on the margins. His advisor title meant he could still show his face, but he wasn't steering anymore. He paced in corners, phone glued to his ears, selling stories that no longer bought belief. Workers watched him the way you watch a weather forecast. You hope for sun, but you pack an umbrella anyway. When they looked at me, it was different. Not awe, not fear, just watchfulness. Like people checking if the roof beams were going to hold. I gave them no speeches. I just stayed visible, clipboard in hand, boots on the floor, shaking hands, asking about kids, checking machines. Because speeches don't clear checks. Paper does. That night, I stood outside with my jacket zipped to the chin, the city lights smeared by drizzle. I thought about what Sloane must have been doing. Probably clinking a glass, pearls glowing in candlelight. I didn't envy her. I didn't resent her. I simply didn't care. Because under my roof, people were finally breathing easy. Patrice called just before midnight. Anonymous tip came in, she said, her voice steady. Allegations of collusion, bank, vendors, you. They try to spin it. I smiled. Tired but certain. Let them bring wind, I said. We brought paper. She chuckled softly. That sip's why you still win. I hung up, poured myself a cup of cold coffee, and opened my notebook. On the page marked Thanksgiving, I wrote 3 lines. Payroll cleared November 24th. Vendors paid no 25. Mass tagged out. Evidence, plain and unglamorous. Not pearls, not Ferraris. Just receipts that spoke louder than champagne. When I closed the notebook, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And steady is the most dangerous thing a man like Evan could face. Because his empire was built on glitter. Mine was built on checks that cleared. Justice rarely sounds like sirens. It sounds like direct deposit. That thought stayed with me on December 6th as I stood on the airport site, boots muddy, watching a steel beam slide into place ahead of schedule. We had delivered early. Procurement signed off with a curt nod, the kind of approval you don't post on Instagram, but that keeps companies alive. No ribbon cutting, no champagne, just a clipboard check mark, and that one mark erased months of Evan's bluster. The next morning, a small piece ran in the Seattle Business Journal. Turnaround saves jobs, airport installed, delivered ahead of schedule. It wasn't a headline that would trend, but it didn't need to. In my line of work, survival is a headline. That afternoon, Sloane texted me. Coffee? I almost didn't go. But curiosity has its own pull, so I met her at a downtown cafe, the kind with white tile walls and single-origin espresso. She arrived, polished, pearls at her throat. Hair perfect, nails painted in a shade that whispered old money. You bought his company because of me, she said without preamble, voice low but sharp enough to cut porcelain. I stirred my coffee slowly. No, Sloane. I bought it because men who falsify logs don't deserve payroll. Her lips pressed into a smile that wasn't a smile. You star still bitter, that seps all this is. Before I could answer, the bell over the cafe door chimed. Eli walked in, late but not surprised. He must have known about the meeting. He spotted us, slid into the booth, and said nothing, just listened. Sloane leaned toward him. Sef's been under pressure, but Sef's still a builder. Your father just didn't want to take risks. Elisip's eyes flicked from her pearls to my weathered hands resting on the table. Then he said quietly, one of you built checks that bounced. One of you built checks that cleared. That sip's the only risk that matters. Her face tightened. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken through the one person who mattered most. On December 9th, Evan's 30-day transition ended. We met in my office, blinds half drawn, the room smelling faintly of machine oil and coffee. He looked older than he had a month earlier. jaw slack, suit hanging wrong. Guess I'll keep the Range Rover, he said, voice flat, non-negotiable. I slid a document across the desk. You still keep it in exchange for this signed acknowledgement, falsified safety log, November 12th, forklift mast photo attached. He blinked, hand twitching as he read. His signature went down like a man carving his own epitaph. No gloating, just closure. At 5:12 p.m., I collected the last key fob. The tiny plastic weight dropped into my drawer with a sound that was quieter than triumph but heavier than revenge. Outside, drizzle slicked the city, headlights smearing across wet pavement. I walked home slower than usual, letting the rain erase the last traces of Evan Rowe from my skin. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote 3 words across the top of the page. Justice is quiet. Because justice doesn't shout. It doesn't clink glasses. It doesn't post filtered photos. It just clears checks. Revenge was loud in my head and quiet in the room I kept lit. That's what I thought as I drove past my old house on December 12th, 2 nights after Evan's transition officially ended. The porch light was on. Once it had accused me, its glow, a reminder that I was outside while another man stood inside with my family. But that night the light didn't sting. It looked almost forgiving, like a lantern hung for someone who had already walked their road. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I just slowed enough to let the image burn into me. The light was still on, but it no longer belonged to me. And that was fine. Back at my apartment, I set the ledger on the table. Not the emotional kind, the real one. Money in, money out. Vendor wires confirmed. Payroll runs cleared. Keys collected. Receipts cataloged. Evidence filed by custodian, photos with Patrice. Affidavits with HR. Invoices with Luis. Everything had a home. No loose ends, no ghosts. Eli stopped by after his evening class. He dropped his backpack by the door. Taller now than I remembered him at 17, shoulders broadening into the man he was becoming. He glanced at the ledger, then at me. "Are you the boss forever now?" he asked. His voice carried both curiosity and caution, like he wasn't sure if power was something to be proud of. I shook my head. "Leadership is rented," I said. "Due monthly like any bill." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like you." We ate together, nothing fancy. Takeout pizza, paper plates, but the room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. After he left, I laid the notebook flat and wrote at the top of the final page, December 12th, closure. Underneath, 3 lines. Vendor auto pay scheduled. January bonus pool set. Holiday party confirmed, December 13th. Families welcome. Simple, precise. The kind of lines that build something lasting. Before bed, I recorded one last voice memo. My voice was low, steady, almost tired. Revenge is instant fire. It sets a boundary with a receipt. Tonight I close the book. Tomorrow I set'll open a different one. I set the phone down, reached for the lamp, then paused. The porch light image flashed in my head again. It had been lit, yes, but not for me. That's when the line came to me. The one I knew I'd live by from here on out. "You didn't lose me. You gave me away." I whispered it once to the empty room, then clicked the lamp off. For the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of invoices, receipts, or rings. And in the silence of that sleep, I understood justice doesn't roar. It simply leaves the light on and lets you walk past without needing to knock. Sometimes the loudest apology is printed in black ink on white paper. That's what I realized the week after the transition ended, when cards began showing up on my desk. They weren't fancy. Some were folded printer paper, some were leftover birthday cards with the inside crossed out, but each one carried the same message. "Thanks." A welder named Carl left his card sealed in a paycheck envelope. Inside, in block letters, "Fell back, pay cleared." My wife cried when she saw the deposit. "Thank you." A machinist, Rosa, handed me a note during a floor walk. "Castor, I almost quit. You made me stay. My kid sips Christmas is safe. Sev." I read them at night in my apartment, laying each card flat like evidence of a different kind. Gratitude doesn't need witnesses, but I cataloged them anyway. One morning I found a card propped against the cracked mast we had tagged out and rolled into the corner of the yard. The mast was useless now, a monument to negligence. On the card someone had written, "Sec. For not letting this kill us, thank you." I ran my hand over the jagged steel and thought about how close Evan had come to turning his lies into casualties. That afternoon, I wired a donation to the nonprofit that trained our new safety lead. It wasn't charity, it was insurance for people, not profits. Payroll cycles kept clearing. Vendors stopped calling at midnight. For the first time in months, the shop floor buzzed with work instead of rumors. One night, as I locked up, Eli called. His voice was softer than usual. "Dad," I said, "I'm proud of you." I didn't say much, just leaned against the doorframe, keys in hand, and let the words settle. Revenge had been my engine, but gratitude, that was my brake. And sometimes stopping is as powerful as striking. I slid the last thank you card into my notebook and closed it. Evidence complete. Apologies delivered not in words but in deposits and checks that finally meant what they promised. And in that silence, I understood something simple. Sometimes revenge doesn't end with a shout. It ends with a paycheck that clears. I thought revenge would end in fire. Instead, it ended in groceries. That's what I muttered to myself at Pike Place Market on a gray December morning. The place smelled of coffee, fish, and rain-soaked pavement. Tourists snapped photos of flying salmon. Vendors shouted prices, and the city moved on like it always does. I was carrying a vendor gift basket, local honey, roasted coffee, and a handwritten thank you note for Luis. A simple gesture, heavier in meaning than any diamond. It weighed more than a grudge and cost less than a lie. That sense when I saw them. Evan and Sloane. They weren't dressed for a gala now. No pearls, no blazers too tight across the shoulders. Just two people moving through a crowd that no longer cared who they were. Evan's eyes looked smaller, his jaw slack, the swagger gone. He carried nothing but his own shadow. Sloane smiled, but it was the kind of smile people practice when the room has already changed, and they're pretending it hasn't. For a second, our eyes met. No words, no confrontation, just recognition. She looked away first. I didn't stop. I didn't gloat. I just shifted the basket in my arms and kept walking toward Luis's stall, the note tucked carefully inside. Because irony doesn't need applause. It only needs time. By the time I handed Luis the basket, Evan and Sloane had disappeared into the market crowd, two faces among thousands blurred by drizzle and distance. I stood there a moment longer, the smell of fresh coffee rising from the bag, and realized that revenge doesn't always end with headlines or handcuffs. Sometimes it ends with a basket in your hands, a note of gratitude, and the simple knowledge that the truth held. And in that quiet, I whispered the line I had sputtered. "You didn't lose me. You gave me away." Then I walked home, lighter than I'd ever been, the city around me humming with the sound of ordinary life, louder, steadier, and more beautiful than any lie ever told.